Welcome everyone to another webinar presented by My Pinnacle Network, Rockland Trust, and South Shore Networking Professionals. Today we have Dana Hall with us, who will be talking about is franchising right for you, and going over some of the considerations of that choice. And I want to start by doing introductions of our sponsors. Joe DeRamo, do you want to do a quick welcome from My Pinnacle Network?
Absolutely, Steve. My Pinnacle Network is a business-to-business networking organization. We have 5 locations: Braintree, Mansfield, Needham, Pembroke, and Westboro. These are monthly groups for people who are B2B professionals and or small businesses whose customers are other businesses. Again, it's a monthly group, and we have 5 locations. You can find out more at mypinnaclenetwork.com.
Thank you, Joe. And Lois Druckman, can you give us hello from South Shore Networking Professionals?
Absolutely. We're an open networking group that is made for over 10 years, and now we're working with the My Pinnacle Network to co-host these webinars, and eventually we're hoping to do a few networking events every year, about 5 or 6 once pandemic really is over. But right now we're sticking with the webinars and very happily helping sponsor these.
Thank you, Lois. And I want to say a couple words from Rockland Trust. They offer a wide range of banking, investment, and insurance services to businesses and individuals throughout numerous retail branches, commercial lending offices, investment management offices, and residential lending centers throughout Eastern Mass and Rhode Island. And they're available online, mobile, and phone banking as well. So given that, let me start with an introduction of Dana Hall, our key speaker today. Dana got a bachelor's from Adams State, North Adams State, in a portion of the state that is next to impossible to reach, named after John Adams, I believe, John Adams Communication. And also he has a master's degree in business from Suffolk. Dana has more than 20 years of experience in franchising, has worked for such well-known names as Panera Bread and also Wendy's, and currently works for FranNet of Boston, where he helps match budding entrepreneurs with the right franchise. And in some ways, I would say connecting the right franpreneurs, because they need to be entrepreneurial enough to bring vigor and energy to their business, but they do need to work along with a partner and stay within the parameters of that partner's guidelines. And so with that, I welcome you, Dana.
Steve, thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate the sponsors having me as well. So thank you. Glad to be here.
Our pleasure. So let me start by saying I am guilty of being experienced in franchising as well. PR Works has a number of franchisors as clients. I'm a past president of the New England Franchise Association, so I know some of the thorns and roses and misunderstandings as well. And I think the biggest misunderstanding is that the novice thinks of franchising as only McDonald's, some gigantic franchise organization that is almost unapproachable in terms of the investment for the individual to get involved, and fairly rigid in its operation and has been around forever. But there are lots of other examples of franchising, from small startups, emerging franchises, in-home franchises, non-food related franchises. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the overall landscape of how you see franchising in terms of the kinds of different opportunities?
Yeah, sure. It's one of the great myths actually of franchising is that it is all fast food and retail. It's the concepts and the things that you drive around and see every day because they're visible. The reality is that franchising in this country, there are over 3,000 legally franchised concepts. So a franchise, quite simply, is a license to use somebody else's operating system, their patents, trademarks, branding, and so forth. And that spans a wide variety of industries, probably 90 industries. Everything, you mentioned several of them, there's senior care. There are concepts that are just B2B. There are consulting concepts, health and beauty, fitness and wellness. So, probably, again, 90 plus industries, a variety of investment levels. So it does span a very a wide range of options. And it's not just the 7-figure, highly visible concepts that we see driving around.
Okay. And I guess the real question that people say to me when I talk about franchising is, why would I bother to pay somebody a fee so that I can then try to earn some money? Why wouldn't I just create the wheel myself?
Great question. I've had, I get clients regularly saying, if I present a sign business to them, well, I'll just buy some printers and have a space and I'm off and running. And I don't try to be flippant about it, but you talk to somebody to say, okay, well, day one, what are you going to do that first day? And, oftentimes you get silence, right? Because there are literally 200 questions to ask yourself. Where am I going to source that equipment? How do I negotiate a lease? Who are my suppliers? How do I set up a website? Who are my target customers? Is there an operating manual around here somewhere that tells me what to do? So very true. There are a lot of mom and pop and concepts and companies and small businesses, and they're perfectly fine. But for that person or persons, couple, that doesn't want to recreate the wheel, that wants to be, I call it entrepreneur light, right? You're still a business owner. It's still your responsibility, but you have a roadmap that you can follow. You don't have to reinvent that wheel. So that the value of franchise brings is I wouldn't call it turnkey. I don't want to make it sound like it's simple, but there's certainly a roadmap and a playbook.
What I think one of the other misconceptions about franchising is that every franchise is run like McDonald's, that it has a really tight operations manual. It has a very well thought out marketing strategy. It has all the aspects of a business that you need to have a largely turnkey operation. Literally, you turn the key in the morning and you follow directions, and it's nearly impossible to fail. But there are lots of small emerging franchises that are very different, that require the franchisee to be much more aware of the other ingredients they need to add. Can you talk a little bit about that and the difference in terms of maybe even your personality or your purse strings for which kind of franchise you might jump in on?
Like most things, there's a wide spectrum in franchising, and that's one of them. So what is the experience of that franchisor? So the Subway, who has this very regimented, as a customer, you walk in, you go from left to right. The pickles are always in the same place. It's an assembly line. So that is the extreme. And McDonald's the same thing, right? And there's a system for everything. A lot of your smaller, to your point, franchisors that are emerging, that have a framework, they have a concept, but how dialed in is the execution in terms of day-to-day operations, in terms of marketing. So it does span a pretty wide range. There are inexperienced franchisors. What a potential franchisee needs to understand in their due diligence is asking those questions. There's a process called validation where you as a potential franchisee will get a chance to hopefully talk to other franchisees. And just by the number of units, operating territories in that particular concept system, that's going to indicate in addition to how many years they've been in business, is this an early adopter opportunity? Or is this more of somebody that doesn't like any risk and it's been around for 40 years and you are truly plugging in, like you said? So to your point about personality, it's that person that's going to be that franchisee that's the second or third one in really needs to be that early adopter. And oftentimes that franchisee needs to be the kind of person that wants to give input to help mold the future of the system. So it does vary widely.
Okay. And not all franchisees look alike either, right? I would think that this, and I have seen in my experience that sometimes it's people who are from other countries who aren't getting a fair shake in our corporate world in the US. Sometimes it's women who are blocked by the glass ceiling. Sometimes it's recent college kids who want to start their own venture and are having trouble breaking into the conventional employment market. Sometimes it's retirees looking for a different additional income. What do you see as the franchisee candidates who come to you? Are there some sort of standard outlines, profiles of those folks?
Actually, no. In terms of how you just described it, I have minority candidates. I have husband and wife candidates. I have just literally right now in my pipeline. So it does span a wide range. What I would say that some of the common threads are, there are typically people middle-aged to a little bit older because they probably have some savings, right? Because it's not free. So they have accumulated some resources, and they're folks that have really legitimate transferable skills of some sort. You don't have to have industry experience. You don't have to be a mechanic to own a Meineke. In fact, you probably shouldn't. You don't have to be a hairdresser to own a Great Clips. But you do need transferable skills from your past, whether that's a corporate position, whether that's even in higher education or the military. A lot of veterans make great franchisees. The transferable skills are things like, you know how to build a team? Can you hire and manage and develop people? Are you good with financial management, profit and loss statement, cash? Do you know how to manage those types of things? Do you have business development skills? Are you good with talking to people and articulating the benefits of a particular product or service? Those are all things that people oftentimes have in their past, even though they're not business owners, and they don't realize that those things can be applied to a franchise system. And if you plug into one that has robust support, it could be a great match. You can take those skills and utilize them in a different way.
All right. And then one thing I want to sort of have you clarify for us before we go too far is the difference between a franchise and a quote business opportunity, or as it's referred to in industry parlance, biz ops.
Yep. So your biz op, if you're a licensee, if you're a distributor potentially, those are all far less from a legal standpoint defined. If they're not bad, there's nothing wrong with them. They're just different. So a franchise is very specific in that there's filings with the federal government. So the Federal Trade Commission has oversight of the franchising industry. So to be a franchisee, to be an actual franchise legally, you have to have a series of documents. You have to have an operating manual. You have to file a franchise disclosure document with the government. That's a very lengthy, very detailed document, typically 200 pages, give or take, that has a wide variety of disclosure information. And this is all regulatory required, right? So if I have 10, of my own sub shops and I got a chain, that doesn't mean I'm a franchise, right? It is a legal designation, and that FDD has to be updated and resubmitted with the government every year. In some cases, some states have their own requirements. So there were what are called registration states, where you actually have to have separate approval and documentation from the state. State of Massachusetts is a non-registration state, doesn't require that additional layer of regulation. So, which is interesting, right? I see Joe like, huh, how about that? California, New York, Maryland, these are tough states to be a franchisor because of that extra effort.
Okay, and then would you describe like the three stools, the three legs of a stool for franchising is the franchise, they have to call themselves a franchise if they have control over you as a franchisee. They require you, or at least partially share their name with you, the brand, and also that they require you to share some of your profits.
So the profit part is typically for a franchise. So in exchange, when I said earlier what a franchise is, right? It's the license to use all of that intellectual property, the systems, the business model, and so forth. In exchange for that, there is going to be a franchise fee, typically. So I call that skin in the game. That's the upfront, trying to weed out potentially the people that really shouldn't be doing it. And that can, again, like everything in franchising, there's a spectrum. There's a $20,000 franchise fee. There's a $125,000 franchise fee, just depending on how much territory you're buying or how many locations you're committing to. So there's that upfront franchise fee. And then there's going to be an ongoing, what's called royalty. So you're going to pay them a percentage of your gross sales over the span of a typical 10-year franchise contract. That royalty fee is going to, again, vary. It's from a low, I'm just going to give you a reasonable range, 5 to potentially 10%, depending on the system, how it's set up. And again, the devil's in the details. When you look at that FDD, what does that 10% include? For some, it's all inclusive. For others, they will line item out royalty, advertising fund, technology fee, and it's all separate. So, being very cognizant of what's actually in those fees and how they define it is important. So, profit sharing, it's for the franchisor, it's the franchise fee and the ongoing royalty. That's where they're making their money as a franchisor.
Got it. And that franchise fee can typically range from 5% of gross sales to a flat fee on a monthly basis, like $200 or $500.
There are some concepts that will do a flat fee. There are some that will do a flat fee until it hits a certain threshold, and then as a percentage. There are some that do a sliding scale, right? So the more volume you do, the smaller the percentage is. There are some that will, in the first year, forego half of the royalty in order for you to get cash flow positive quicker. There's so many different ways to skin that cat, but it is, by and large, it is the percentage of top line gross sales paid typically on a monthly basis. That's a very standard royalty setup.
Okay. And so if we go back to the scenario you and I discussed just very briefly prior to recording this, I have a friend who recently retired, had a fairly successful career in advertising, and now as a retiree feels that he really needs something more to do, something that gives him more meaning and some revenue, so he doesn't have to worry about his retirement nest egg. He comes to your door. What do you do with him next when he says, I'm interested in buying a franchise, and he leaves it that open-ended?
So we go through a series of steps. The very typical series of the first 3 or 4 steps. I'll just have an introductory call, trying to understand where they are in life, what the goals are, why you even talking to me? What was the impetus for this? And at each one of these, if somebody says, that's not for me, fine. We shake hands and we walk away. We do an assessment much like anybody that's ever taken a DISC assessment or Myers-Briggs. It's very similar. It's a standardized sort of assessment, but it's different in that I'm not trying to figure out if you're an introvert or an extrovert. We're trying to understand your value systems, your motives, what's important to you, and what are the ways in which you work. So it's really business focused. We do that assessment. We review that with them. If they continue to be interested and say, yes, I think this is something that makes sense. I think it could fill a void, right? Whether that's financial or otherwise. We'll do a very detailed client meeting, asking a lot of questions. I was talking to Joe, when we got cut off a little bit. We're matchmakers. So our goal is to, here are my 5 goals. Can a business meet those? And if yes, how do we figure out how to match them? So that's where the questions come in. What do you want your day to look like? What are your skills? What do you not want to do? One of the key things is understanding what the business does versus what you as the owner will do in it. I can't stress, that's probably the one takeaway. If anybody listening, if the one thing you remember is separate what the business does from what you will do in the business. My go-to example is when I was with Panera bakers. If you've ever met a baker, a true baker, some of the most passionate people you'll ever know. And these people would come in at 10 at night, leave at 6 in the morning, and they loved it. They were artists. But if you're going to own a bakery, you may not be baking, right? You're going to be doing payroll. You're going to be hiring people. You're going to be talking to the supplier. You're going to be checking in the order. You're going to be doing ink, all these things, and suddenly you're not doing what you're passionate about. So if you can hire all those things and you're the owner and you're the baker, great. But just understand that, that's the most important thing. So that's something we talk to clients about. And then we start introducing them to potential concepts that could fit. So that's the very standard 3 or 4 steps we take people through. And then there's a whole diligence if they really are serious about how to assess a particular franchise, the questions to ask. You could get an attorney involved at some point to review the documents if you're really serious about investing. So that's kind of the overview.
All right. And financially, does someone pay up front to use your service? And secondarily, in terms of finances, is that part of the vetting that you do to determine where they may fit in with potential franchise options?
Absolutely. It's one of the key questions to understand. I can't present, something that's a $500,000 investment if somebody only has 20,000 liquid, right? So typically, you're going to need as a franchisee about 25%. It can vary, but just as a rule, 25% liquid of what the total investment is to get this business up and running. And then, there are other ways to fill that gap beyond that, SBA loans, there's other financing options. But yeah, we need to know that. So I'm not presenting you with things that excite you and then you realize you can't afford it. Or something that's really on the lower end of investment and maybe not, provide you the upside that you were looking for. As far as how I get paid, free to clients. So the way we work is much like an executive recruiter, if you've ever worked with a headhunter, so to speak. So that franchisor that would ultimately be matched with a candidate, they'll pay me a commission. So it costs the client nothing. The franchisor pays me that. And, I often get, does that mean it's going to cost me more because they're paying you? And the reality is I know it seems like it should and that it does, and somehow they're sneaking it in, but like anything, they have to market and develop and they have costs and they find franchisees in a variety of ways. We're just one of them. So, it's built into their overhead structure. So you're not getting dinged as the potential franchisee from using me. Okay.
And once you present an option to the franchisee candidate, you started to talk a little bit about what they should do to vet their comfort level and their confidence in that opportunity. Can you expand upon that a little bit? Who they should talk to, what they should do?
So then there's a second sort of multi-step process if you get that far. So you're going to have an introductory call with that company. And again, each one of these steps, if you're not interested as a candidate, you walk away. There's never any obligation or the first time you're going to spend any money likely is the franchise attorney, honestly, to have it reviewed. So you're going to have an introductory call with that company. And then they're going to have a series of calls. They might have you watch a webinar, but they're going to talk to you about the details of the business model, like how do they go to market, how do they execute day to day, what differentiates them, what is the technology that they have that helps run the business. They're going to talk to you about their marketing. How involved do you need to be as a franchisee? Do you need to be a hunter, out there getting business, or can you just be a farmer? Right, where it's going to come to you and you just tend it. So they're going to talk to you in detail about that. And then at that point, you're going to just what they call disclose you. So you're going to get that FDD, that franchise disclosure document. You're going to review that as a candidate. And then again, iterative, right? Each step you can walk away. At that point, you're going to start talking to other franchisees, both those that the franchisor will provide you, and inside information. You can call any of them. It's all listed in their FDD. So you can make a whole series of calls on your own, and I encourage that. And you're going to hear from other franchisees. And hopefully, if you talk to 8 of them, you're getting the same story that you're hearing from the franchisor. And if you don't, red flags, potentially. Then a franchise attorney, maybe an accountant, and at some point, you make a decision. You're either signing or you're moving on. So that's a very typical series of steps that can take, if you're real aggressive, you can do that in a couple months. If you're more risk averse and somebody that asks a lot of questions like me, it could take you 6 months. So it's all dependent upon your level of diligence that you want to take.
And going back to having your attorney review the documents, which is always recommended, it's sort of almost a joke within franchising that the most money goes to attorneys before and during litigation after. That it's a very litigious business because people put their entire life's nest egg into it. And if it doesn't work out, there's a lot of arguing. And also, franchise agreements tend to be onerous and one-sided for the franchisor. How much negotiation can your attorney bring to the table to make omissions and addendums to a contract so that it might be weighted a little bit more towards the buyer of the franchise?
Great question. And, and I'm not here to defend either side. The onerous part on the franchisor side, and this is going to sound self-serving to them, but, part of that is protecting the brand and making sure if I've got 200 franchisees that they're all doing sort of the same thing. So it is a brand protection. And yes, it does read as very one-sided. And that's part of what you would talk to other franchisees. There are a lot of clauses and verbiage in there that's there to protect, but, asking other franchisees, hey, how strict are they with this? Are they going to enforce every last, clause? Those are important questions to ask. But as far as changing a lot of it, there are wiggle room. There is wiggle room on certain parts of this. Territory, for instance, how they define a territory is something that, can potentially be negotiated. Timelines, they'll say, from the day of signing to the day you open. So if say it's bricks and mortar, they'll say you have to open within 6 months. Well, during COVID, most of them were like, whoa, we know that's not even possible. So we'll put an addendum to say an extra 6 months. So those things are very flexible in many cases. A lot of it will not be. And the role of that attorney is to translate for you as a potential candidate. Here are the 20 things that, that's legalese. That wasn't English. This is what it really means. You really know what you're getting into. And some of it you'll say, okay, I can live with that. That's fine. I didn't understand how it read. That's the biggest role of that attorney, is just to make sure you're completely understanding and comfortable with what you're getting into. There are a few places where it can be flexible.
And the other consideration for franchising is the resale, right? So let's say you're a retiree, going back to my friend. He decides, yeah, I'm going to buy a 10-year license with a franchise. And what I'd like to do is build that franchise up and sell it, because I have a tangible, concrete item to resell. But the problem is he's only got a 10-year license. So if he wants to sell year 9, basically he's selling a business that only has a 1-year lifespan left, correct?
Technically, that is correct. Can it be potentially worked where there is a re-up as part of that sale? Potentially. That's something you'd have to talk with the franchisor about as part of the sale, right? In there's a whole section that talks about renewal and and selling. And again, the franchise attorney is very critical in that area to understand, what your obligations are. Ultimately you own that business. You do have responsibilities to the franchisor. And typically the big ones there are, they're going to have to usually have either right of first refusal to buy it, because some franchisors might be interested in actually assuming that as a company location. But that's a little bit more rare unless you're a big bricks and mortar like a Panera Bread. They sometimes would do that. But then they'll say, we get to approve who that new owner is. So they're going to put that new owner through a very similar discovery process as they would, an owner for a brand new territorial location. So those are things to consider on a resale.
Okay. And then, franchising, like any other industry, goes through trends. So 2 trends that come to mind and are most obvious are, we've had 2 different waves of frozen yogurt explosions, right? The early one was TCBY, and the next one was it red leaf, orange leaf, and all those that came along?
So there was red mango, there was orange leaf. Locally, Menchie's was actually a big one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was a trend, because I think it appeared to be sort of health related. It was kind of fun. Do you see other trends now, especially since we've gone through the pandemic? Are there more sort of home office based franchises or comfort food franchises, or is there anything that you see that is sort of popping up?
I always find that food does, and I probably know more than I should just because I worked it for years, right? That does tend to be one of the areas that, tastes change dramatically all the time. And there's, there does tend to be fads in that space. So, that's something as a potential franchisee to be aware of. Is this durable? Is it something that's going to be around for 10 or 15 years? The trends right now, I would say a couple of areas, certainly anything in home service, your bath, kitchen remodel, repair, painting, refurbishing, people spending more time around the house. Try getting a pool installed these days. Like, you're out until beyond next year. So people are investing in their home and their property. I think there's 2 reasons for that. One, the obvious one, everybody has been around their house more. So they're looking at all this honey-do list stuff and saying, I finally should do this. The other thing is people weren't spending money. People weren't going on vacation. There's some pent up savings and money there. And I think people realize that the home is a good place to invest it in. The other area are things that are more demographic. So a lot of the senior care areas, that's a demographic thing that's not going away. 10,000 people turn 65 every day. I'll get it wrong, every day or every other day for the next 20 years. So, anything around home health care, aging in the home, modifying the home, those concepts are going to be around for quite some time and growing. So those are the two areas I'd say are in that.
Okay. And then there are sort of two different theories in franchising and in business in general. Do you start a business and choose a business, either a franchise or a do-it-yourself, that you are drawn to because it's your passion and your expertise, or do you choose something that simply you feel is going to be profitable? And how does that play out over time? Have you seen, can you speak to that from some of the folks you've worked with?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that you got to be careful of the passion play. And should you have a true interest in whatever business you're going to be involved in? Probably. It's hard to get up every morning and get jazzed if you don't have an interest. But you said it well, actually. You've got to balance what you're passionate about with what is going to financially be, durable. Too often you see people that love something on the exterior, but then when they realize what it takes, it doesn't fit with their day-to-day, or it doesn't meet their financial needs. Now, if you're somebody, we have clients that come and just say, they have a spouse, that makes a lot of money. They just want to be fulfilled. They want to make a few bucks, and it's not the primary reason for getting into business. That sounds crazy, right? Who would go into business to only make a little bit of money? But there are people there. So that's where you have to know what your true motives are for doing it. But I always caution about, I go back to my baking analogy. If you can figure out how to marry the passion with the day-to-day operation of it, that's fine. Just don't get blinded by, this looks so great from the outside. My other great example is Chick-fil-A. What a great concept. Great company. People see the lines, there's three drive-through lines. Oh my God, they're making tons of money. All right, but how many employees do you want? Well, I'm pretty good with teams of 5. Do you like working nights and weekends? I'd rather not do that. You start asking the questions, and it's like, well, this is a cross-up, right? That's a 6-day-a-week deal with 60 or 70 employees and long hours, and it's a great business, but it's got to meet your day-to-day lifestyle. And so that's what you need to really be, aware of.
And then just in terms of, so the SBA has some franchise-related loans. And I would assume that your organization has what they refer to as blue chip, less likely to fail franchises. Can you explain the difference between those sort of more old guard franchises that are considered less risky versus potentially startups or those that are ramping up?
You're right. There are those legacy concepts that have been in operation for 30, 40 years, have a much longer track record, have a much more experienced franchisor and a more experienced franchisee system. And that's the other advantage to franchising is you have peers now. You have other franchisees that you can draw on. They're doing the same thing, and if you've got, 100 franchisees out of 400 that have been in the business for 20 years, that's a wealth information. So there are a number of, like you said, more seasoned concepts versus the younger ones. I don't know if I would want to list off a bunch of names, but something like Great Clips, I don't mind throwing a few out. Again, 4,000 locations, been in business for a number of years. It can still fail. Like, don't be fooled. It's got to be in the right location. You got to operate it well, but a well-defined system. Fast Signs is another very established, well-known, very experienced management. So yeah, those types of early adopter or young, the risk associated with those is a much different risk. It's more you as the operator. Are you gonna be willing to operate in their system? Franchising is not for super creative people. I'll be very blunt with that. If you've got your own way of doing everything, that it may not be the best fit.
And I don't want you to name franchises that you would not recommend, but I would assume that you simply don't carry them as part of your portfolio of potential introductions. And is that typically franchises with less than 100 units? Is there a size or a litmus test for those?
So my firm and others like me, I probably have a similar process. We have what we call an inventory. There's about 250 companies that, and that changes, over time as they grow. But we maintain that inventory as a subset of the whole franchise industry. So, the same wide span of investment, the same wide span of options. But the process our headquarters team goes through, and they're very experienced, is vet them just like you would as a potential franchisee to be in that system. So they're going to ask, who is the management? How long have they been in business? What is their background? Are these competent executives? What is their business plan? And oftentimes what you'll see in franchising is a very experienced franchisor might have two other brands under their umbrella, and they're going to start a third one because they see opportunity there. And there's only 5 locations, but they're highly experienced. These other 2 brands have been around for 20 years. They have 200 plus locations, for instance. So that's the type of scenario where we would be more comfortable showing something that's very young and early adopter, because they've got a proven record of building these systems and showing success, because they have 2 other brands that they've done it.
Okay, and let me just pin you down a little bit further. Is there a minimum number of units of franchises that you recommend people get involved with? Is it, they have to have at least 50, or is there any
There really isn't.
Okay.
No, we have concepts, right now that only have, 20. But again, they're probably have the infrastructure and the management and a track record somewhere else that suggests that they're going to grow and succeed, because they're not just a one-off unknown commodity. But in the number of units isn't as important. It's an indicator for sure, but it's not as important as who is operating it, who owns it, what's their plan. Because again, there are people that like that, being on the front end of something, and we want to make sure we're providing people that opportunity. One of the things with franchising is, there's oftentimes is this sweet spot. If you're something that's very built out and established, that's great for the people that are already in it. But what if somebody wants to get into that? It's all sold. On the near end, it's unproven. So if you're a concept that's been around for 10 or 15 years with 150 units, and you've established success and you can demonstrate that, but there's still open territory, that's the best of both worlds.
Got it. Okay. And I'm going to wrap up here, but I leave it to you to sort of, if people are interested in franchising, any other sort of general advice of the thought process they should go through? And I think I'll talk about a couple other resources they can reach out to, and we'll share your contact information as well. But I'm talking about just sort of general, what do you need to think about if you're thinking of buying into a franchise organization?
Yeah, it's really about educating yourself and being, really thoughtful and being informed. So if I'm stealing your thunder, I apologize. So the IFA, for instance, the International Franchise Association, which is sort of the governing body, if you will, of franchising, has their website, just from a pure education standpoint, as a wealth of information. Our website does a similar thing on a smaller scale where you can be well informed. I would say Franchise Business Review, if you're talking about periodicals or websites that are reputable, that give a lot of really great information, that's a good one. And then Entrepreneur Magazine has a great section on that, and they do a ranking of the top franchise concepts overall and by different categories. I just caution people not to, get overly focused on just, it's ranked number one, it's great for me. Because again, it has to fit you. But if you put all that education and background and information and, you do some diligence and get informed about what you're looking for, what franchising is, that's the first thing. And those are some great resources to get informed.
Thank you. And then the only one I would add to that is the New England Franchise Association. If you search for it, by that generic term, you'll find that there are New England located events that are worth going to rub elbows with other people in the industry and get some insight from. It makes it local. So thank you, Dana. And let me ask, what's
Joe has a question.
What's that?
I think Joe has a question.
I do.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
You mentioned earlier franchising for veterans, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on why a veteran or somebody with a military background is a good candidate for a franchise.
Excellent question. Franchising, again, is something that has a good franchise system. I'll always preface it. They have that roadmap. They have a system. They have a blueprint, manual. Military folks in general are very regimented, right? They like following a system, and they understand how to do it. So they just very often, because of that, they're a great match. And they typically are people, they're on time, they're great with logistics. I mean, these are all things that just scream, small business ownership. And, if a veteran doesn't want to recreate the wheel, a franchising model is pretty good for them. You'll see probably a third of the companies we work with provide a discount on the franchise fee. And you'll see a lot of franchise concepts will very specifically tout the percentage of their system that are veteran owned, and they'll try to attract veterans because they know oftentimes, especially an officer, fits that profile of what they're looking for.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Any other questions before I go to the summary close? Okay. So, Dana, thank you very much for joining us. I think you laid it out really well. And I think anyone whoever ends up listening and seeing this wants more detail and more customized information based on their situation, they ought to contact Dana directly. Dana, what's the best way to reach you?
So best way is email. So dhall@FranNet, one word, FRANNET.com. You can also find me on the FranNet website. You just search for a consultant. I'm Boston. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. There's not too many Dana Halls unless you happen to find that boarding school in Wellesley somewhere. That's not me, but yeah, it should be easy to find on LinkedIn too.
All right. Well, thank you, Dana. Thanks everyone for joining us. We appreciate you attending another webinar sponsored by My Pinnacle Network, Rockland Trust, and South Shore Networking Professionals. We will keep you informed of other upcoming events in the near future. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you, folks.